While most fans would consider the sequel to 28 Days Later to be inferior to the original film, just about all of them would agree that the first opening 10 to 15 minutes is, perhaps, one of the best scenes in zombie movie history. This entire sequence has a tense atmosphere, a good jump scare. It feels like a hectic and desperate struggle when the infected eventually break in, and the scene also leaves the audience with one hell of a moral dilemma, being that Don leaves his wife behind after being presented with a very difficult choice. And it's that very moment within this particular sequence that I want to discuss in this video. Was Don morally and ethically right or justified in leaving his wife? And if his actions were technically wrong, were they at least permissible? Or is he really just the world's worst husband? In order to answer this question, we're going to have to rewind back to the beginning of this scene. Plus, we're also going to have to collect further information from the rest of the film. But before we even do that, let's quickly cover some basics. When covering ethical issues, we cannot ignore metaethics and general ethical attitudes or preferences. This would actually warrant its own video, so I'll just quickly explain where I'm coming from. I am a cognitivist that's a moral subjectivist, who acknowledges the need for moral and ethical systems due to our existence as a social species. And the system of morality and ethics that I personally prescribe to and endorse is known as eudaimonistic utilitarianism. Now that's one hell of a simplification, so feel free to look those terms up, as explaining them here would distract us from the topic at hand, and it would also take a considerable amount of time. Anyways, let's continue by starting at the very beginning of this iconic scene. What is made immediately clear is that these characters have been surviving in this boarded up house for some time. We know that this house isn't even Don's house due to the dialogue that we hear later in the film.
Your mum and I were hiding in a house. A wee cottage. It's an old couple that owned it.
And we also know it's not his house due to the fact that his stupid kids find their mom at their real home in London. We also learn early on that Don and his wife have children.
Our children are safe, aren't they?
Totally, yeah.
Thank God we paid for that school trip. Can you imagine if we hadn't have done?
Oh, I can't imagine.
So it's clear to me that these characters have survived for quite some time, having perhaps encountered many infected in London, which by the way is not far from ground zero of the initial outbreak in Cambridge. They should all know how deadly the infected are and how easy it is for someone to get infected. Without a serious long-range melee weapon or some type of PPE, they ought to understand that combat with the infected is essentially a death wish. So keep that little tidbit of information in the back of your head for right now. Now, suddenly out of the blue, a kid comes knocking on the front door. Don, being one of the only people with a brain in that house, aside from fucking Jacob, implores his wife not to open the door because of the inherent risk such an act poses to the group's survival. By relying on some poor black and white deontological system of morality and ethics, Don's wife lets the kid into the house. And soon after he consumes some of their food, which, by the way, is already in short supply, we find out that the kid was being followed by the infected. And when the kid is asked about how many have followed him, he says the following.
There's others too.
How many?
Loads.
So clearly letting this kid in was a bit risky. Even if the infected don't find the group, they'll be around the area looking for him. Him being here is a serious danger to the entire group's survival. From the additional consumption of resources to the literal fact that he's brought death with him to the doorstep of our survivor group. Now, this is a classic case of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few. While there's certainly room to debate this axiom, the fact of the matter is most people intuitively understand that saving one life at the risk of an entire group is a morally dubious decision. Because if things do go wrong, you lose more lives than you could have ever saved or preserved. And that is an outcome which is incredibly difficult to justify, unless you're dumb enough to prescribe to rigid moral systems. The ethical and literal ROI just doesn't add up. In fact, this sort of reminds me of an old saying, which is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Be that as it may, this chick looks out a window, gets spotted and bit, and then shit hits the fan. And you want to know who's the first to start swinging with a crowbar? It's fucking Don. So he's clearly not a coward. But he loses his weapon after this altercation and he ends up chasing after his wife, who runs off with the random kid. And eventually we get to this iconic scene.
Leave him! Just leave him! I see him! Leave him! Dawn! Help us!
So the question remains, was Don right or justified here? We can clearly see him weighing his options before making a decision. And it's clear to me that he made the right choice. His wife was cornered. He had no weapons, which means combat is not possible here. Her decisions are partially why they're in this situation to begin with, and most of all, Don has to also worry about his kids. If you have to choose between having one dead parent and two, the decision is actually fairly easy to make. Going with the ride or die option, as romantic as it may sound, ensures that everyone dies and that those kids end up as orphans. His kids may not be very bright, but they don't deserve such a fate. And if you truly love your spouse and see that the situation is hopeless, the last thing you should want is for them to die with you. That is actually very selfish. Real love would leave you wanting your spouse to escape safely. But I digress. Don could not save his wife. He would have died here had he opted to fight the infected with his bare hands. Expecting him to throw his life away for a mistake his wife made, while also being fine with leaving his kids as orphans, is, frankly, unethical. It's actually quite stupid as well. And most people, if they were in Don's position, would make the exact same choice despite what some of them might say publicly. The inherent dishonesty from the people that criticize the choice of this character also bothers me a great deal. Now, if Don had a realistic way to save his life, then I would understand why some people dislike his choice. But you know, I know, we all know that there wasn't a realistic way for him to save his wife. And we all know he didn't know she was immune, nor did he have a reasonably compelling reason to hedge his bets on immunity. His final decision was not only permissible, it was logically and ethically justified. Now clearly this act ends up weighing on him over time, and his survivor's guilt would eventually lead to the second outbreak of the Rage virus. But that is a topic for another video. Maybe. Anyways, if you like this sort of content, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification icon so that you may be notified when I publish a new video. And also remember that you may opine anytime if you feel so inclined down in the comments section. If you'd like me to tackle other ethical problems in zombie movies or shows, let me know. I'm Captain Gold and I hope to see you in my next video.